Coming up on This Week in Radio Tech, Chris Tarr is our guest again. It's part of our Back to Basics series. And today we get to cover studio transmitter links. I know that sounds, I don't know if that's interesting to you or not, but there's so many options now. And we're talking about building new studios and how they can be way simplified from what they ever were before, and yet still get plenty done and sound even better. Those things are true, and it's coming up next on TWiRT.
This Week in Radio Tech is brought to you by Broadcasters General Store with outstanding service, savings, and support online at bgs.cc. By Broadcast Bionics with the Bionics Studio, including talk show control, social media, and visual radio. Broadcast Bionics brings exceptional audience engagement to radio and TV. By Angry Audio. Audio problems disappear when you get angry at angryaudio.com. And by Max Connect Wireless, prioritized high-speed internet service designed for transmitter sites and remote broadcasts.
Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack, your host. I am in the Spanish office of This Week in Radio Tech. I'm not in the usual Telos Alliance office in Nashville, Tennessee. I and my wife are kind of on a vacation in the last couple 3 days of it here in Spain. We're in Pontevedra, Spain, which is in the northwest corner, big seafood town, and it's been a lovely trip. Last couple of days we drove down to Porto, Portugal, and enjoyed that. I haven't gotten to visit any radio stations yet, and I'm trying to get into some FM stations tomorrow. So if I do, I'll take some pictures, maybe shoot some video, do my best Spanish, not much, and we'll see how that goes, and maybe bring that to you in a future episode. But enough of that. Also here with us is Chris Tarr. Chris, welcome in. It's good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, and I'm somewhere equally as exotic, Maguanago, Wisconsin.
Well, see, how long did it take you to learn how to pronounce Maguanago? Was that, you picked that up pretty quick?
It wasn't long. I mean, I grew up around here. So I grew up literally like 10 miles away from here. So I grew up knowing Waukesha, Conomowoc, Maguanago, Muskego. It's just part of what I do. Now, it is funny trying to, I get on the phone with like customer service people or doing orders, and they try to read that back to me. Oh, so your address is, or to spell it. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to spell it for you. Get ready. Mukwonago. What? So, yeah. So it is exotic to a lot of people.
Wow. Well, fortunately, a lot of cities in Spain are not that hard to spell. I think all of us can probably spell Madrid. That's not bad. Barcelona is a little bit longer. Malaga or Malaga is, I wish we were there. It's nice there. It's on the Mediterranean. It's been rainy here. And rain. This town where I am is a lot like Seattle. Everybody's used to the rain, and it's never a really hard rain. So everybody just has umbrellas. You go to any business, and there's an umbrella pot, at the front door. You go to any bar, any restaurant, there's umbrella holders everywhere, and everybody owns 3, 4, 10 umbrellas. So people are
just always moist.
It's moist. That's what a word.
It's always moist.
Always. All right, well, let's talk about things that shouldn't be moist, and that would be studios and STLs. We are in our Back to Basics series. Right now, it's just a 2-part series. We might do more later if there's some demand. Last week, on our first show of 2025, we talked about transmitter sites, specifically FM transmitter sites, and some of the things that you need to consider if you've got a construction permit in hand or you're going to make some improvements that the FCC would allow you to make. And we talked about that. So if you're interested in learning what Chris has to say and a little what I have to say about FM transmitter site construction, building, choosing the equipment, fulfilling your requirements and your construction permit, go back and check out that episode number 729. Today, we're going to pick up on kind of where we left off. We kind of left off with tube transmitter or solid state. And for the most part, solid state's where you need to be. Chris, let me ask you, did you have any final thoughts on that comparison, that tube versus solid state thing before we move on to the next topic?
All right, just really quickly, it just makes sense financially, because as we mentioned, tubes are expensive, and they're a voracious consumer of electricity. So, it's solid state's where it's at. It saves you money. And so especially when you go, well, we're a small station, we can't afford solid state. Really, you can't afford not to do it at this point.
Oh, that's a good point. I take care of a station. Actually, there's another engineer that takes care of it. I help him out sometimes in Memphis, and it's a community radio station, very popular, and they're still running a tube type transmitter, and they're going to need to have a fund drive for a solid state because it's just getting so expensive to keep that transmitter going, and they know it. They've just got to bite the bullet, do that fund drive, raise that money, and get that transmitter. Okay, well, and they're still they're different, but they're still cooling considerations for solid state transmitters. Some companies make transmitters that have available liquid cooling or partial liquid cooling, a combination of air and liquid. But whether it's air, liquid cooling is pretty cool, but there's plumbing involved. You kind of want real professionals to handle that. You don't want to spring a leak. But whether it's air or liquid cooling, you got to follow the manufacturer's recommendations. Chris, we took over a couple of AM stations on Maui, the island of Maui, and we have some real work to do in correcting the installation mistakes on a couple of Nautel AM transmitters. They're being fed dirty air, and the dirty air means it's filled with lava dust, and that's not good for any transmitter. So we have some work to do there. All right. Chris, moving on, we're going to talk about two topics today. One is studios and maybe back-end infrastructure, and we're going to talk about studio to transmitter links. Unless you're lucky enough to be putting your studio at the transmitter site, or you have the tower, at the studio, and that doesn't happen so much anymore. You're going to need some kind of way to get audio from the studio to the transmitter. So, Chris, why don't we start out with studios, if that's okay with you? It's a good place for you to start.
Actually, I kind of want to go in reverse because we've already started at the transmitter. So let's work backwards. Okay. So, in the olden days, the FCC generally didn't allow remote control, so the studios were generally located at the transmitter site. Then in the 60s and 70s, we got the 950 megahertz STLs. Now, originally, you had the discrete STLs, which were just mono narrowband units that would send left and right channel if you were FM or single channel if you were AM. And then you'd have the processor out of the transmitter site, and that would feed your transmitter. And there were some inherent problems with those. The phasing of the two devices had to be perfect. Otherwise you'd have an imbalance in the channels. They were kind of noisy. Overshoot, and you couldn't get the audio loudness from them that you normally could. So then the fix to that was the composite STLs. And what that did is that could take your baseband signal and transmit that. And it would send that over to a baseband receiver on the other end and feed composite audio to your transmitter. And what that allowed for is to have the processor at the studio side. It was all one unit. And so, you'd have any problems with channel imbalances or things like that. But that came with its own problems too. And a lot of that was, overshoot, things like that. You couldn't modulate or clip really hard because, over the air, it regenerated peaks and things like that. So people put composite clippers in there, and it created a mess. Then time marched on, and there were digital STLs. And again, this is all 950 megahertz licensed links. And you could do digital and send left versus right, or left plus right, and go back to putting your processor at the transmitter, which is really where it should be, because then you have just a nice short run from your audio processor to your transmitter. Newer transmitters take digital output, digital composite, things like that. You can really get a boost in loudness and clarity that way. But again, it's still a 950 megahertz link. The downside to those links, first of all, is you don't have the amount of bandwidth that you would have otherwise. So you're usually doing some sort of data compression. The other inherent issue with those is you need line of sight. So your studio has to be line of sight to your transmitter site. Now, obviously, with antennas and towers and things, you can fudge that a little bit. But, you have to be able to get that audio. You have to be able to get those two antennas to talk to each other. So that really limited locating your studio. You had to have your studio when you couldn't pick whatever studio you wanted, or building. You had to find something that you could get a clear line of sight path from that studio to that transmitter site. So that kind of created an issue. In response to that, with the creation of things like a T1 line, which is the early version of the data line, 1.5 megabits per second, they came out with something called an Intraplex. And originally it was its own company, and then Harris bought it. And what that did is that was a channelized, a T1 has a bunch of 56K channels, and they developed cards where you can send certain data back and forth. It's bidirectional, and send certain data back and forth to your transmitter. One of those things could be aptX audio, because uncompressed audio took that whole entire 1.5 megabits to send uncompressed audio from the studio to the transmitter. You could do that, but then you couldn't have anything else on that link. So, they came up with aptX cards that only took, half the time slots or 3/4 of the time slots, and you could put some other things on there. So that went on for a while. And then we moved into things like fiber and IP radios. And that's where we're kind of at now with some of that stuff. And, I still believe that 950 megahertz licensed links are the standard, the gold standard. They work low enough in frequency where you don't have a lot of interference or rain fade issues or things like that. They're reliable. The technology's been around forever. However, they have those limitations. So, we've started to move to things like fiber connectivity and IP radio connectivity, where you have all of this bandwidth and you can put your studio wherever you want. You don't need to have line of sight. So, for example, when we bought our stations in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we had a building there, and La Crosse has pretty challenging terrain in terms of trying to find something line of sight. Now, the towers are out on bluffs, and they're pretty high in the up in the air. But to be able to get shots from different parts of town, it's very rolling terrain. It was very hard, and we were locked into a pretty expensive lease for a building because that was really one of the only spots that we could get a clear STL shot from, or the previous owners. So we made the decision that we were going to do fiber and IP radio, and just be able to pick the place that we wanted. The place that made sense for our staff and our advertising partners and things like that, and something nice. So by being able to use this new technology, we were able to leverage that to decrease our cost. Our rent cost went down. The audio quality went way up because I can send uncompressed audio over fiber. And the way you do that is with these codecs. And there's a bunch of companies that make them. I use Gateseer IP links. And what those are is I can send anything from, very low end Opus all the way up to uncompressed audio over the fiber links. And of course, fiber, you've got all this bandwidth, available to you. So you can do audio back and forth. You can do data. So the upside to this now is I can send uncompressed audio to a transmitter site where there is the processor, but I can also do telemetry for the transmitters back and forth. I can do RDS data back and forth. I can put IP cameras out there, anything I want to do over this one link. Now, we all know that these things, as we're just talking about with the fires and things like that, you run the risk of having this infrastructure fail. Like I said, 950 is the gold standard because it's just a point-to-point RF link. You don't rely on third-party infrastructure to make that work. So there's a couple of ways to get around that. One of the ways I use is IP radios as a backup. They do use line of sight. However, they're really easy to hop. So if you want to, relay it around a couple of times, that works. The infrastructure for that is relatively inexpensive. Ubiquity is a company I use, and $500 per side gets you a really good IP radio. So you can use that as a secondary backup. We also have, again, because of the data, I can mirror our automation systems out at our transmitter sites. So I can actually run it from the transmitter site if I need to. So, that's how the STL world has changed. in that you now have a lot of flexibility on what you want to do. You can still do, I still have a couple of sites that have a traditional 950 megahertz STL, and they're great. If you can get the bandwidth, or if you can get the line of sight to do that, go ahead. These IP links now, you can attach them to digital 950 megahertz radio, and you can get uncompressed audio over them now. The compression schemes and things have gotten to the point where they're pretty robust. So you can do a one-way link over 950 if you can get the shot. I'd recommend that. However, you no longer have to say, I got to compromise on a building because I need line of sight. We were able to go and find facilities or buildings that were really nice, that were perfect for our use case. And I didn't have to sit there and go, okay, I got to do, some studies to see if I can make it from here to there. I just went, put fiber in here and we're good to go. And in fact, we now have a data center where we run some of our stations from that has a couple of fiber connections in and out, and I can harden that building, and I can take that building and, I have a whole building, double conversion, dual conversion UPS generator, a couple of fiber lines coming in for redundancy. And, I'd love to do that at every building, but that's cost prohibitive for a lot of smaller stations. So I could plow all of that money right into that one facility. And that really helps. So, those are some of the things with STLs that, have changed over the years.
So great points all the way around, and I appreciate your careful look at this. I'll make just a couple of points just to add and dovetail onto yours. On the one hand, 950 STL links, they need to be licensed. You probably need to frequency coordinate that with perhaps somebody in your area. Maybe it's somebody who's an SBE member. You may want to check with your SBE to see about frequency coordination, because you don't want to knock somebody else off the air or interfere with them. These are licensed services, and they're supposed to be coordinated. The good thing about 950 megahertz STLs, they're, in the grand scheme of things, they're not terribly expensive. Typically anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 to $5,000 per end. So you may spend $10,000 on two of them, but the transmitter and the receiver tend to be pretty robust. They tend to be built to broadcast standards, even some of the less expensive ones. I've had them work literally for years and years and years. Just keep dust out of them. They seem to put up with lightning pretty well. We do try to, put lightning arresters in the coax cable and properly bond the outer conductor of the coax cable. The antennas aren't too expensive, and they're pretty darn robust, especially the ones made by Catrine. Those are great. So there are things to love about 950, and that little slice of spectrum where these live is pretty much just for broadcast, for AM and FM broadcasters. So you're not likely, if somebody fires up some IP radio security cameras down the street, those are not going to interfere with your 950 STL. On the downside, even the best performing analog ones, not digital, but analog ones, they're going to have a noise floor that's typically only 65 to 75 dB down. And that was great in 1984. But if you want your stereo signal to be as clean as a whistle and as pure as possible and be receivable in stereo for as much distance as possible, you really want that noise floor down farther than that. It meets the FCC specs for noise for an FM broadcaster, but these days we can do a lot better than that. As you mentioned, Chris, it's one way only. Ain't nothing coming back over that link, and that means you can't really use it for anything else other than getting your audio reliably from studio to transmitter. And you got to consider what you spend on a 950 radio pair. You can buy several IP radio links for main and maybe hot backup or on backup, and maybe a couple sitting in the garage. You're ready to go back up the tower if something goes wrong, because these IP radios, as you mentioned, Ubiquity, and there are other brands too that tend to cost a bit more, but yeah, you can really pay for some backup for what you spent on your IP radio. And the IP radio is two-way. Yeah.
And if I can jump in, you can get licensed IP links as well. You can go up into the 11 gig, or so you could get, if you wanted to, a licensed clear link. Now I've found that the 2.5 and the 5 and these unlicensed links with the frequency hopping, I've not had a single issue with them. But you are right. I do have backup. I usually have 2 radios going to each site, and they're cheap enough where I do have some sitting on the shelf. Now, for the main links, I use the really expensive high-end Ubiquiti radios with radomes and things like that. But then they have cheap $150 radios that I use as backups. And those are, heading to the same path. So, you still have those. Plus, in most cases, I have fiber as a main connection, or I've got Mac Connect or something like that. So it just takes a little planning. But I'll tell you what, my coworker who owns the radio stations, the first time I converted to a fiber connection with the IP links, he just fell in love. He's like, this is the cleanest, clearest, best sounding audio that I've ever heard.
Yes.
He was sold. And I mean, because fiber is not exactly cheap. And with 950, that's the other thing. Remember, with 950, it's one expense and you're done. If you do fiber, that's a recurring expense. But he thought it was so worthwhile that it was worth the additional expense at every one of our sites. Now, we have many transmitter sites, but that's always now our first step. What are we doing for IP there? Because we won't do STLs anymore, the 950s, because he just loves the audio quality and the ability. Again, I've got my phone here and I have cameras at every one of my sites, and I can look at the cameras and see what's going on. And, we've got the Burke system for autopilot and other things, so I can look at a web page and see all my transmitters. So that's not even a question anymore. We just do it. So, but yeah, I just want to go back to, there's some concern that you can fire something up, but I've got radios, in Milwaukee. I've got radios in other larger cities that shoot over the city, and I've had no problems. So, with unlicensed links, they've come a long way.
Something that I want to point out, and I'll go ahead and do it now just for our commercial break. And Chris, I'm sure you agree. On the one hand, we know that Internet protocol and all the stuff that carries it can be a little complicated, much more complicated than a 950 megahertz analog composite radio. That's an FM transmitter and an FM receiver that operates at 950 or thereabouts megahertz. Whereas if we send audio that's been turned into IP, there's a lot of stuff that happens to those packets as they make their way from your studio to the transmitter site. Even over an IP radio, some stuff happens. But if you're going through the internet, there's a lot that happens. There's a lot of things it depends on. That's the bad news. It goes through a lot of things. The good news is those things tend to be cheap. They tend to be replaceable. They tend to be extraordinarily mass produced. And many, many, many other industries all depend on the same technology. And so,
I'm sorry, and there's some tricks there that you can do as well. I do VPNs over the fiber, over the public internet, so that the VPN handles all of the routing and the different twists and turns. The audio sees it as a single path from A to B, so it's a lot more efficient getting the bits from A to B. The other trick, and this is a good one if you're planning these, if you can get end to end the fiber provided, the internet provided from the same company, your data never leaves their internal network. So it's even though it's IP, you never leave out onto the public internet. You stay internal on their network. So you basically get what is essentially a point-to-point connection because it stays on their network. And I've got pings, as low as 4 or 5 milliseconds out of public internet using the same provider.
And we've enjoyed that at several places ourselves. In Mississippi, there's a provider that is kind of statewide. They ran a fiber loop all the way around the state years ago, and now they're selling retail. They were just a backbone provider. And in Memphis, the station that I mentioned earlier is on the same provider, 25 miles apart from each other, but and I wish it'd be more reliable, but they have their own set of problems. But it doesn't leave Memphis. It stays within their network in Memphis, Tennessee. But my whole point there was IP is technically, it's a lot more complicated, but it's also what everybody is doing, what everybody depends on. And so it is a very efficient manufacturing, very efficient technology sector, right? a technology sector that is well understood and very, very flexible. There's lots of different ways to skin that cat, if you don't mind that analogy. Hey, it's Chris Tarr and Kirk Harnack. We are talking about studio transmitter links, and coming up, we're also going to be talking about today's modern studios. What do you really need? And Chris, I'm sure you've done this many times. I'm doing it in Hawaii. We're tearing out unbelievably overly complicated studios and really streamlining the workflows, very much simplified. So that's something that we'll talk about what would be oversimplified, what's too much, cutting back. We want people to do their jobs and do it comfortably, and so we'll be talking about that coming up. Hey, I do want to mention we've got our first sponsor, Broadcast Bionics, is coming up, and I mentioned last week that we have a new sponsor coming on. We're going to start with something next week from them, but Playout One is a product from Air. That's AIIR, and they make a fantastic automation system. I think they're fantastic. We use them at 21 radio stations across our networks, and they're going to be a sponsor starting next week. So we're going to hear some plugs and some technical expose, if you will, from Dave Brierley Jones. Dave has been a guest on this show several years ago, and now they're going to be telling you, what Playout One is all about and all the cool features that really make it work well. So that'll be coming up. All right, we're going to take a quick break. Broadcast Bionics is on tap next, and we'll be right back.
Welcome to the Bionics Studio. The Bionics Studio brings all audience interaction to the fingertips of a production team in radio, TV, and podcast. Our workflow-led system is working 24/7 around the world for small broadcasters and national and international networks. Our telephony module, Bionic Talk Show, allows cost-effective centralization, remote operation, scalability, and resilience across an entire network of stations, but at the same time is used in single-studio self-op environments. Social media curation and activity is now considered a broadcast-critical part of programming. Bionic Social means the studio isn't overwhelmed with a wall of interaction from an ever-growing number of social platforms. We combine SMS, MMS, and email together with a speech-to-text service for listeners using smart speakers. We enable studio teams to curate, filter, and display all platforms in one place, and post text, images, and video content to multiple platforms in one operation. Effortless collection of video content with Bionic Director has helped position some of the world's most successful stations as leaders in viral content, generating appointments to listen and free marketing via retweets and shares. Bionic Contest enables end-to-end tracking of on-air competitions, live reads, and prizes. These could be on-air contests, automated SMS entry, or online. Anywhere, and Skype TX for Radio brings high-quality audio and video contribution into the studio with ease. No need for dedicated PCs to run different applications. Everything is controlled within the Bionic Studio UI, and incoming connections are visible to users along with all other platforms. Our codec integration enables connection, algorithm configuration, and directory to a wide range of IP and ISDN codecs. The Bionic Studio, a unique suite of products designed to enable your talent to work smarter.
This is one of the things I love about the Bionic Studio. It kind of goes along with what Chris and I are talking about on this episode. You can do so much more with less stuff when you have the Bionic Studio. It's pretty amazing what you can do with it. All right, I'm Kirk Harnack. It's This Week in Radio Tech, and Chris Tarr is along. We're doing Back to Basics. We've talked about studio transmitter links, and Chris, I got a one last thing here. Let me show these three pictures. Suncast is going to bring them up. The first one, this should be our dish. We talked about this on a previous episode with Russell Lafferty, but this is an 11 gigahertz licensed STL system. We do have this license, and nobody else should be on our frequency. It is I want to say it's about a 24-mile connection from this transmitter site, which is at the top of, almost at the top of Mount Haleakala. That building on the peak in the background is super secret. You got to have a security clearance to go there. If you drive up there, yeah, men who are armed come out to talk to you. Anyway, but we don't do that. We just we just do the 11 gigahertz. Look at the next picture here. Inside the building, what we have is an Ethernet switch, just a simple Ethernet switch. There we go. And we're going to put a better one up there. This one was handy, and we just threw it up there after we found out the problem with the first one that we threw up there. And this just takes the data stream available. It extends the network, essentially. Our network is extended to the transmitter site. And the next picture, please, there, Suncast. In the next one, we see what we're feeding. We have 4 of those Omnia MPX decoder nodes. And so we are decoding the micro MPX streams coming from the studio. And there are 4 stations running at this Mount Haleakala site. 2 are, I think 2 of them are good size power, and 2 of them, I believe, are translators. So anyway, that's how we're feeding that. And of course, we have, two-way communications. I don't think we had put a camera up there yet, but a camera is going up there. And then we can do, of course, all the remote control for the Nautel transmitter and for the Bext transmitters as well. Now, at the moment, Chris, we don't have a backup for that. Luckily, the antennas and the IP radios are not that expensive, so we'll be ordering a backup real soon. And we do have a technician on site who would be capable of swapping those out should we ever need to do that. I'd love to have them up there, as a hot second path, but I don't think that's in the cards just yet. So, Chris, what do you think?
Love it. And, we have, because we use 2 internet links, I have the firewalls that I use for VPN can take 2 inputs. So I've got fiber and then I've got the IP radio, and it'll just fail over from one to the other and back.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. But that is one thing, and we'll talk about that with studios, is it is all Ethernet. So you got to think about switches and cabling and things like that. You want to make sure that's all good too.
You also want to think about heavy RF at a site, because not all Ethernet cabling or switches puts up with that very well. And we just kind of roll the dice, and at most places this worked. We had a site on the island of Kauai that was not friendly to Ethernet at all, because even though the FMs were not particularly high power, the antennas were literally 4 feet above us, and separated only by a piece of fiberglass roof. So there was a lot of RF in that building, and we had to do a lot of. We used some Nautel toroids to reduce that RF coming into it. Chris, is there more STL, or would you like to move on to the studio topics?
No, let's go to studios.
Okay, so Chris, set this up. Fundamentally, think about studios that you built in the 80s and 90s that you worked in yourself on the air, and compare that with if you're charged with building a new studio now, what are some of the major differences in how you're going to approach a studio today versus maybe studios that are still out there?
Oh my, I wish I would have thought about this beforehand. I would have sent pictures in to show. But, right. The older studios, obviously there's a ton of wire. You use punch blocks and you use point-to-point wiring. So there's really no flexibility. You could get some analog switchers or some matrix switchers, but generally you are doing, hardwiring a CD player in the studio, then it goes to a punch block, and then it comes out of a punch block into something else. Or, getting audio to, for example, an STL. You'd have your output of your console, it'd go into a punch block, into another major trunk cable to somewhere else to a punch block, maybe into your EAS, then back into a punch block. And, it would just go through all of these steps through just tons of cable, which means that, every hop you add a little bit of noise. You'd have attenuation on the high end because of just the distance that you're having to go. Sometimes you'd have to increase the gain of the audio to drive the cabling, which increased the noise. So it was a huge mess. It's what we had. And, when it's done well, it looks great. It functions well. But I will tell you, so far, I've done 2 studios that were built up over many, many years and converted them to IP. And I have pictures of me up to my knees in old cables that I've pulled out. So, that's really the main thing now is, And we'll get into that in a second, is, with audio over IP, all of that goes away. But, there are still a lot of studios out there that use the older wiring system, and there are some inherent problems. If it's not documented well, which is generally the case, you're doing a lot of troubleshooting trying to trace wiring out. And obviously over time that changes, and a lot of times those changes don't get documented. I believe I mentioned once where in Milwaukee, when I first started working in Milwaukee, the top 40 station there, I always thought the processing sounded a little weird, and I could never figure out why until one night we were doing some work and we were putting in a new, I think it was an Ariane processor or something. And I had my assistant in back behind the racks, and we were disconnecting the audio one channel at a time to move it over to this new device. So I said, pull the left channel. And he pulled the left channel. I'm looking at the mod monitor, and both channels have audio. And I said, pull the left channel.
Oh.
And he's like, I did. I said, no, you didn't. I can still see audio. And he dangled the XLR in front of me and went, it's disconnected. So somewhere along the line over the years, that pair got messed up, and it was running in mono, and nobody knew. And nobody knows when it happened. So all of a sudden I went, okay, let's fix this. So I went in and we found another set of pairs that we could send audio over, and all of a sudden everything sounded fantastic. But who knows how long that was, or even why. So that's the danger of using that analog wiring over the years.
And I will point out, you can have routing that you didn't expect, even in the AOIP world, if you kind of forgot where stuff is, or if you're not using a program that shows you the whole routing template that you're actually doing. And certainly Axia makes such software that shows you, this is what's actually hooked to what. I don't happen to use that myself, but I have some smaller systems. So, Chris, a few weeks ago, in fact, it was on episode 726 with Russ Lafferty. If people want to go look at that, you'll see some examples of old wiring that's been around for 20 plus, maybe even 30 years in some studios, and it's just cable upon cable upon cable upon cable. It's every time they wanted to do something, they'd add another distribution amp. And all kinds of switchers, and the way we had to do things a long time ago. Oh, I don't want to mention, you mentioned about all the wiring. I never did this, not because I'm better, because I just had to hook stuff up and make it work and do it as simply as possible, and with rarely any real backup. But I've been to stations in big cities where every audio source device, CD players, record players, cart machines, cassette decks, everything, maybe even the microphones after preamplification, everything came out to some punch blocks in the hallway that were nicely covered up. And from there, everything went back to the rack room. Every stinking thing for like 8 studios, and then went through normals on patch bays, and then went back to the same studio to go into the audio console.
As recently as 2005, I built a new studio facility in Madison for Intercom Odyssey, and it was like that. I put in punch blocks everywhere, and we ran, audio from the studio to a punch block in the studio to a punch block in the back, and then all the way back again, because you needed to have that flexibility. If you needed to route that somewhere else, you had to have it on a punch block somewhere.
Well, let's make sure people understand, Chris. If I have, goodness gracious, a CD player in a control room, and its output goes into, I'm familiar with Axia, I work for those folks, its output goes into an Axia node, and now that audio is present as audio over IP. If I want to route that somewhere else, Chris, what do I have to do?
Mouse click. You just have to take that source number and put that as a destination wherever you want it to go. And that's the same with Wheatstone. It's the same with Dante. It's the same everywhere. So you just have, you basically take your microphone, plug it right into the engine, and there it goes. It's available everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And I point out that's not an exclusive function of Axia Livewire. Everybody can do that.
Right.
And that's just this huge benefit of audio over IP as a technology to make it easy to build studios. I've mentioned before, and I'll mention it again. I built a studio for Dave Ramsey, the financial guy, and this was 15 years ago, and we had some help from a really good engineer. But that really good engineer wanted to put a patch bays. He said, well, what if that thing dies? I want to be able to patch it around. Well, if that thing dies, you got no audio, but okay. So he wanted to, and for the next year, every single problem we had was, guess what? It was caused by an air gap in the patch bay.
Sure.
And every time, is this problem with Axia? No, it works fine. The problem is here.
And the great thing now is that's actually the convenient wiring is also in the analog realm. So if you, for example, didn't wanted to go voice audio over IP, you could do something like the Angry Audio Rave or Audio Arts or something like that all take Studio Hub, and you can avoid dealing with patch bays. And they now have really, Angry Audio makes them, a couple others make distribution amplifiers that take those Studio Hub RJ45s, and it's basically you wire with Ethernet, which has benefit of twisted pair. So there's a lot of isolation there. So, excuse me, it's not just audio over IP that has eliminated punch blocks. It's this new analog stuff as well, and because obviously you want to keep your runs as short as possible. You want to eliminate, these patches. And I will tell you, no matter which way you go, just the audio difference alone is worth doing. You'd be surprised, for example, how much noise a broadcast tool switcher injects. I mean, those things can be pretty noisy, the older ones. So, and there's still a lot of those older ones in service. And those can add a lot of noise. So, and people don't understand nowadays with things like the blades, the Wheatstone blades or the Axia nodes, you can use those for switching audio.
Yes.
And we do that. We've eliminated the switchers in our automation systems, but we can still switch audio pads, and we just do it digitally in a node. So, we've eliminated switchers, we've eliminated distribution amplifiers, we've eliminated punch blocks, and the difference is night and day, not only with audio quality but simplicity. You can build a studio in an afternoon, and I've done it. I built a main studio for our lacrosse stations. Me and my friend knocked it out in an afternoon and had a fully functioning studio with all the bells and whistles, not a single punch block in sight.
Let's I brought some pictures, and instead of me crowing about them, why don't you either crow about or pick them apart? What might you have done different? I say studios plural. Nope, this is one studio on Maui, and we're going to build another one that'll be a talk studio with more microphones. But Suncast, let's take a look at these pictures in order here. I just wanted to show that you go ahead.
So that's a Radius. That's the Radius, correct? I make sure I get the name right. So that is an Axia console and an Axia phone system, and I've actually installed several of these, and they're perfect for small stations. They're inexpensive. In fact, I've talked about the fact that it only costs a little bit more than a traditional console. So really, and there's a lot of cost savings that probably make up for the difference in price. For example, if you notice, there's only 8 channels. What if you have 12 channels of audio? Well, guess what? You want to switch one of those faders to do something else? You can do a preset that reloads new channels. You can take a single channel, dial up a different input, put it on the air. Let's say you have another studio there and you want to share, for example, a remote gear for remote broadcasts. You don't have to buy one for each station or have some kind of clunky switcher. Either studio can bring that up. So, there's a lot of value there for smaller stations to be able to share audio sources. You get cleaner wiring, you take up less space, you don't have to buy as much infrastructure. And coming out of the back of that surface right there is a single CAN bus connector. that goes down into a rack mount engine that's the brains and the power supply. And from there, you have one Ethernet cable that goes out and talks to other devices. So, you know, it couldn't get more simple. And there's a whole lot of value there. And again, we're looking at Axia, but it's the same thing with Wheatstone and these other things, where small stations, they look at this and they go, oh, that's really nice, but it's out of my price range. And I explained that actually, you know, over time, you're going to save a lot of money. And a great example is a group that I consult in a very small town of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And they love these. I installed the first one years ago when their radio systems console died. And they ended up putting them into all of their studios because, you know, they didn't want to buy 3 of everything. They wanted to share, equipment for live broadcasts. Again, even things like, let's say, streaming. Axia and you know all the manufacturers make these virtual sound cards that talk Livewire. So with streaming computers and playout computers, you can use these drivers and connect them to the Livewire or the other networks from the other manufacturers. You can put them on the Livewire network, and you don't have to wire in distribution amplifiers. You don't have to wire in interfaces. They plug right in to the Ethernet network. So, for example, our playout systems connect right to the network. They don't connect to the board. They connect to the network, which means I can put any station on in any studio. With the streams, I can put the streams on there, and I have the streaming computers all in one place. They just plug into a network switch, and that's it. So, you know, I'm not having to run a DA to split that audio into 3 or 4 different places. I just say on my streaming computer, hey, this is what I want to monitor. I'm going to monitor the program out of the board, put it on the stream. So, you know, you eliminate all of that infrastructure. You make it very simple, and you make it much cleaner. And again, for these smaller stations, there's such a cost savings to that. Not only in, the reduced need for infrastructure, but also management. You don't need to have an engineer coming up there every time something fails. For the Fond du Lac stations that I mentioned before, I can log in and I can make all the changes I want. You know, if somebody says, oh, we want to put this here, I can log in and make the switch. I've taught them how to do it. If there's a problem, I can log in remotely and reset things. So, there's really no reason not to do that anymore. Another great example is in our Fort Atkinson data center. I've got a couple of stations running out of there. I put in an Axia studio there, Livewire studio, and I can run any of those stations from that studio.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So I don't have to build 5 studios because we don't occupy, we like every other station mostly. We're not live 24/7. So I don't want to build 5 studios for 5 stations. That's expensive for studios that remain empty. I can build 2 studios with Livewire and still serve those 5 stations. So all of a sudden, that is saving money. I mean, you're paying less to do that and getting all of these benefits.
Hey, we're going to take a quick break here. And Suncast, sorry for the last second change. There's a picture in that album I want to show. It's the 5th picture because it relates right into our sponsor. The 5th picture has those equipment racks in them. And there you go. I have a lot of gear. In fact, everything in this equipment rack except for the 2 new Axia Studio Edges, and I'll identify those later, and the 2 file servers. You can see one of them, the blue box, the big blue box at the bottom of the 3rd rack, and there's one below it. Everything else only has one power supply. Everything in there has only one power supply. So I cannot plug all those computers, all the little Lenovo computers. I can't plug those into like 2 different power strips, one that's on UPS and one that's not. So I've got a solution, and I haven't put it in yet. We're going to be putting it in on my return trip there in a couple weeks. Suncast, go ahead and show our sponsor here, and that's this Henry Engineering back UPS device. I love this thing, the back UPS. Here's what it does for me, and maybe you can think of a different use for you, but you see it's got those 2 power inputs, an input from the UPS and an input from either another UPS or from the commercial power line not on a UPS. And the idea is here, normally it will run from the UPS, or I think you can make it run from either one, depending on where you plug it in. But the whole idea here is that if you need to do some maintenance on the UPS and you've got everything in your rack plugged into that UPS, and those things only have one power supply, you're kind of screwed. you've got a real problem on your hands there. How are you going to move everything off the UPS so you can work on the UPS? And by golly, UPSs, sometimes they need to get worked on. I know. So this back UPS will make that switch over, bam, just so instantly that I've never had a computer not just stay on while the back UPS made its quick whoop, flip over to line power. Now, of course, you want to make sure your line power is there. And these are not meant, for a whole rack room solution. These are 15 amp. So you see the outlet, the duplex outlet on the other side of the back UPS. And so that's where your power comes out of at the output of the switching relay. So your UPS dies, or if you kill it for battery replacement or just to test it or whatever it may be, you don't have to have all your stuff go off the air. Hey, these days, Ethernet switches, like I've got these Cisco Ethernet switches there, the CBS 350s. I love them. They're not expensive, but they also don't have two power supplies in them. They have one, and they have about a 4-minute reboot time. Well, I don't want to be off the air for 4 minutes. I don't want to be off the air at all. So the back UPS has been very useful. We put it in our Oxford station, and we're going to be putting 4 of these, one for each rack, in our Maui stations. I'll be doing that in a couple weeks. So we've got 4 of these on order. They'll be in, and I just love these things. Chris, have you had a chance to use these back UPSs yet?
I haven't used that model. I've used they used to make one. I want to say APC may have made one a couple years ago.
Oh,
and when I got burned by UPS, I put those in, and they are lifesavers.
I'm sure I've been saved by UPSs more than I've been burned, but I sure have been burned a few times by UPSs. You can get these from Broadcasters General Store. The website is bgs.cc. bgs.cc. They have the whole Henry line, of course, and they have everything else you need, including the aforementioned Angry Audio equipment. They have Axia equipment. They have everything that you need for radio, and they even got some stuff for TV if you're doing television production. Maybe you're doing podcasting or whatever. Broadcasters General Store. They're in Ocala, Florida, and they are some of the nicest people you'd ever want to have lunch or dinner with. They're just good folks. Love my friends at Broadcasters General Store and the work that they do. Okay. Hey, it's Chris Tarr and Kirk Harnack. We're talking about building new studios, and we talked about STLs earlier. Chris, we're going to buzz through a few more picks that I've got here. Suncast, you start. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to go back to that rack pick that you had.
Oh yeah, sure.
I want to talk about a couple of things about that that I think is good advice, and you're doing some of that there.
And by the way, this pick is early days. It's a lot cleaner now. And
I'm not even, and it's not criticizing. I'm just looking at some things here. And what you want to think about as you're designing these facilities is, first of all, remember that everything revolves around IP. So network switches are so important. You want to get good network switches, and you want to have hot spares ready to go. What I've been doing, and they don't have to be expensive. What I've been doing is I've been buying off-lease catalyst switches, which do have the dual power supplies, the spare fans, all kinds of stuff. They're very affordable. They do power over Ethernet, which the Axia equipment, the Axia nodes will run over PoE. So you can use that as a backup power source to the nodes. So, that is really important as you plan out if you're moving to audio over IP and IP delivery for your STLs, because remember, you've got to take that audio and you've got to plug those into digital encoders that then have to go out to the public internet. So you need a network switch for that as well. If any of those switches go, you're done. You're dead in the water. So you want to make sure to have a really good high-end enterprise network switch and have multiples and have them ready to go so that if you need to, quickly switch from one to the other, you're ready to go. So, and same thing with the kind of network cabling you use, the connectors. If you're in a high RF environment, the twisted pair shielded stuff, they also make really good heavy duty grade carrier level network cable that actually has shield wires in them, and that helps a whole lot. So yeah, as you're designing your technical center for audio over IP and STL delivery over IP, you really want to harden that rack center, and you want to make sure that you have backup IP. Same thing with nodes. Make sure you have a spare node or two. I've had a node fail. They fail. They're electronics. And, if you do that, you run the risk of, being off the air because you've had a node fail. So have another one sitting on their shelf, get ready to do that. Have a spare codec. I have spare codecs sitting around in strategic locations. Just like anything else, anything critical, just like I have spare STL transmitters and receivers, have spares of all this stuff. This is not just throw it in there and it's going to work forever. You might get lucky. Those Cisco switches are workhorses, but you never know. And it's so critical because it's not now a single processor failing, taking a station off the air. If you have something like this set up in a cluster, you can lose all of your radio stations. So keep that in mind as you're planning these facilities out.
Suncast, let's look at our third picture here. And I want to just point out this is a very simple desk here. You notice there's no CD players. We actually have an old one in the rack behind the chair. And I don't think they're going to use it. But they have access to everything on the Axia network right there. They have access to all the satellite receivers, all the ones that we're moving in on our next trip. They have access to all the automation systems. All of them are available on that console, not at the same time. I guess they could bring up 8 of them at the same time and not have a microphone. But, it used to be that we bought an audio console to handle all the sources in the room and then some. Nowadays, you think about buying an audio console that's big enough to handle your most complicated show. How many things do you need to fade up? Now, if you've got 6 microphones in the room with 6 people yapping, okay, you're going to need more than 8 faders in the console because 6 of them will be taken up by microphones. But for every one of the stations that I own, I'm part owner of 21 radio stations now, 8 faders is plenty. And a couple of our stations have 6 faders. And that had some older Axia consoles.
Can I add something here too?
Yeah.
For voice tracking, there's a couple of ways you can voice track that are really easy. And again, this is where the value comes in. There's a piece of software, Livewire, a Livewire switcher. I don't remember what the exact name is.
Livewire Simple Delegation Switcher. It's
Simple
free.
Delegation Switcher, and it's free. Yeah. And here's the thing: is if you're using Livewire drivers in your automation system, there's no reason during off time that automation system has to play through that console. You can put it directly to air and free up that console. The other thing you can do is you can set up a preset. Now I have one station that because of the way it's wired, I can't run the automation directly in. It does have to go through the board, but I can set up a preset, a profile on the console that locks certain functions. So for example, when you go to voice track, you bring up the voice track preset, and you cannot put the microphone on the air, and you cannot turn off the automation system from going on the air. And everything is then pre-configured. You load it up, you're ready to voice track. No more of people voice tracking on the air accidentally and swearing and that's that value that I was talking about, where you used to have a separate studio just for tracking. You can now do that in the studio worry-free.
Let's take a look at the fourth picture here that shows more of the room so you can see what's going on. And I want to point out a couple things. With today's equipment, and this is true for Axia, I assume it's true for the other gear out there, that audio console, that's just a surface. That's basically a mouse that looks like an audio console, okay? So there's no audio in it at all. One cable, as Chris mentioned earlier, is what makes it play. I've had a station that had literally a bullet hole in the roof, allowed rain to come into the building, and of course, it was right over the audio console. We don't think the bullet hole came from inside. We think it came from outside. But anyway, it's a bad neighborhood. So we had water in the console. Well, of course, it quit working. So, of course, the automation was directly on the air anyway. I didn't have to go there. We had a different console we had, a different of the same console shipped in. we had the morning lady literally swapped it out herself with the plug, and you can do that even hot, and she didn't have to reboot it. She just had to bring up the profile.
A great prank I used to love playing on people when they were on the air with those consoles is I'd walk in, lift it up, unplug the CAN bus, and walk out with the console, and everything would still be running.
Yes,
and they would
yes,
just freak out because I just unplugged the console and walk out with it, and things stayed on the air. Whatever was on stayed on because, again, it's just a controller. The audio doesn't run through it.
Let's take a look at that picture again. And Chris, I'm sure you can see how simple this is. We have literally 3 microphones in there. I was going to put 2, but I had an extra little stand over there. So there's a third one in the kind of behind the jock mic. And then there's some headphone jacks. There's the one Ethernet cable for the phone on the left of the console. There's the 2 little speakers. We're going to hang those from the ceiling on my next trip. But right now, they're just Howard speakers sitting there. We have a mouse and a keyboard, and we have a little Lenovo computer. It's actually on the desktop because that was the best place to put it for now. And you can see how, and then there's the business phone over on the far right. Then any equipment needed in the room is in that little rack. We frankly forgot to order.
There are no punch blocks, and imagine this: you can take a room, and you don't have to do a lot of surgery to a room now to put in a new studio. All you need is a network jack to take you to the Axie network and a network jack to take you to the Office network. That's it. That is the only wiring you need between that studio and everything else.
And you know what? That's exactly what this room has. And when we rented this office suite, somehow magically every office had 2 different network cables going to it. We just had to ring them out, make sure they were the right cables. They were already different colors. Can you believe that? And yeah.
Now you add on to that, and if you have audio over IP or IP codecs for your STL, so all of a sudden now, you don't need anything traditional for radio in that building. You can that building could theoretically be in a completely different state, and you just plug it in and it would work, and you could be on the air anywhere in the country from that.
Yeah, but this is in Hawaii, so why would I want to be anywhere else?
Okay, so that's a good point. Now for me, I could probably love to be able to do all my stuff from Hawaii, but that's what I'm saying when you're doing this planning. Once you get all the transmitter stuff out of the way, you're no longer tied to certain kind of way we've always done things type of things. A great example I wanted to mention quick was when we built the studios in La Crosse. I was still this was shortly after I joined the group, and I was still planning like 6 studios because we had all these stations. And I sat down with my coworker, and he said, "Why are you doing that?" And I said, "Well, because it's radio. You're supposed to have a station, a studio for every station." He's like, "But you told me that with this audio over IP, you can route anything to anywhere." I said, "Well, yeah, but you still. So why are we spending that much money on it? Let's build a really nice studio to be our main studio for any of the stations. Build it really nicely, put our money into it, and then build a couple of small studios, inexpensive, that we just use for other things." And he's like, "Most of the time, we're just going to have the playout system on the air." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, we don't need to build all of these studios," and we didn't. So, once you get your head around that, you can do some pretty impressive things. And again, people say audio over IP is expensive, no matter what the vendor is. And I say, really, it's not. When you look at what it can do, you're actually going to save money in the long term.
Oh, and my good friend Andy Linton from Ireland, they were an early adopter of Axia, and they literally saved a customer with several studios literally tens of thousands of dollars in their labor costs. And it's not like they were squeezed for time anyway, so they really weren't, thinking we lost this money on not spending 3.5 weeks punching on punch blocks. They were happy to do it all very, very quickly with just a few $100s of D rings and Cat 5 cables. Hey, we got to take a quick break. And Chris, you're up. Angry Audio is a sponsor of This Week in Radio Tech, and we dearly appreciate their amazing products. And they make some audio processing products for microphones and headphones and streaming. And Chris, It's your choice. It's wide open. Which audio processing product would you like to talk about from Hank?
Well, actually, I'd like to talk about a good portion of their line because it really dovetails into building out studios. So there are situations where audio over IP isn't appropriate, or audio over IP just doesn't make a lot of sense, in which case you want to buy or build an analog studio. Angry Audio is fantastic for this application because it uses Studio Hub, which is the RJ connectors along with Ethernet to connect to everything. It's still analog audio. It doesn't convert to IP, but you're able to run analog audio over network cables. So all of their consoles, their processors, they have talk show gizmos that can turn mics on and off. All of that runs over this RJ connector and the Ethernet. So you can still do that point-to-point wiring. And you can still use things like they've got AB switchers on their distribution amplifiers. They've got ability to convert USB audio into that Ethernet to go into your console. So you could have your playout system converted out to a regular sound card, a USB sound card, into this Cat5, this network connection to your console. So, you still have the opportunity to build a very flexible, very clean sounding, very well built studio using analog and the Angry Audio stuff. They sell the connectors to make it all easy. They sell the mic processors. They sell the Chameleon audio processors, and of course the Rave console, all running over. And there you go. Some of the Studio Hub connectors. These things are lifesavers. You got AD converters, match jacks, panels. You don't have to use patch panels anymore or punch blocks anymore. If you're building an analog studio, you can use those Studio Hub connection panels to make all of those connections happen. So if you're looking at building a studio and you're going, well, we're not quite ready for audio over IP yet, talk to Angry Audio, pick up their stuff. It's well built. It'll work fantastic. The wiring is clean. It sounds great. And of course, Catfish makes these things low noise, great audio amplification in these. They are so clean. So check it out today, angryaudio.com, a great way to outfit your analog studio.
And so true. And another great way to outfit your radio station is with Max Connect. And here's something that people are finding out. There are several different software-based FM audio processors. One called Omnia SST. There's a Stereo Tool, and there's also what's the one from Life? What? Oh God, I'm having a senior. Chris will look it up while I'm talking.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Leif. Love you, dude. And the thing with these is though, if you need MPX audio, your computer, your Mac, your Windows computer, whether it's a server or a standalone computer, you don't have an MPX out. And you may have a sound card output, but that's not what you need. You need a multiplex output to take advantage of the stereo generator that is built into these software audio processors. Well, if you need this MPX output, Breakaway One, thank you, Breakaway One. So if you need that MPX, so you're going to feed a 950 megahertz STL, like we talked about earlier, or maybe your transmitter's right there on site, or maybe you have put the software audio processor at your transmitter site. You've got to have a robust and super clean output that's composite, that's FM multiplex. The way to get this is with the U.192 box from Max Connect. And now there's some behind the scenes here. Max Connect and Angry Audio got together to design and make this box. And because Angry Audio designed the box, the specs are just amazing. This is the only sound card, sound box in the world that's designed to do exactly this. And so it's going to do it exactly right. It does have audio inputs, so you need audio input going into your computer if you want to get it in that way. And then it's got the all-important multiplex output. You see those two composite outputs on the back, 1 and 2, separately adjustable, and they are just perfect multiplex outputs to run that BNC cable to your STL or to your FM transmitter exciter that's right there on site. And then, there, of course, there's the USB Type D connection there on the back. And there's also digital in, digital out, analog in, and analog out available on the back of this box as well. A power cord. This thing is just super well designed, and it's done the right way. There are some not right ways to accomplish the same thing, and that's what hobbyists have been doing. But this is really not intended for hobbyists. This is a real box to give you a super clean multiplex FM output. It's available from Max Connect. Check them out at maxconnect.com. I know it's spelled funny because of the internet, but maxconnect.com. Appreciate very much Josh Moan and his company, Max Connect, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Chris, we are out of time. Do you have a quick sign off, a quick tip of the week for us, please?
You know what? I had one, and it's completely slipped my mind now. So no,
that's okay.
I do not.
Oh, well, okay. Well, we can look at one other quick thing. Actually, the next picture, let's see, it would be picture number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Picture number 6. I think this is really important for stations to do. We did it in Maui. We've done it at a couple of our other stations, Suncast. This is, we bought the Axia X Selector. Now, Axia used to make something called the routing selector or the router selector. Now they make the X Selector. It's got 6 presets. And right below that, I've mounted a Fostex amplified speaker that's rack mounted. It doesn't have to be a Fostex. It could be, anything else. It's kind of a Wohler type of amplified speaker. The benefit here is that any of our disc jockeys, even the general manager, can go to the rack room and punch up, and I need to label the buttons, but they are 6 of our stations in order from the way we typically talk about them, and punch up any station and listen to it on that speaker and get a good idea. Is this on the air? Is it not on the air? How does it sound? And there are meters right above that. Right now you can see it's tuned. It's listening to the KSRR station. And you can also, by the way, you have access to all of the channels on your Axia Livewire system. That big black knob on the right-hand side there of the X Selector, you just push that in. Actually, you just twist it, and it shows you a whole list of everything. You can choose things that are not one of your 6 presets. Yeah, Chris.
And here's a little secret: if you can't, if that's a little out of your price range, you can use that Livewire software to do the same thing. Bring it up on the screen with the switcher, and just go ahead and route whatever you want to the speakers. I do. That's the way I handle it in one of my sites.
But by the way, I got to tell you, it's funny. What we're talking about is a piece of free software called the Livewire Simple Delegation Switcher. It's from a company called Audio Realm. They're in Australia, and they make some great stuff. But it's hard to say Livewire Simple Delegation Switcher. That's a mouthful. Well, it turns out, Chris, that the icon for their software, it looks like a Tylenol caplet. It just looks like a Tylenol caplet. And so all of our disc jockeys at all 21 stations, when they refer to it, they say, "Oh yeah, bring up the Tylenol switcher."
There you go.
It's the Tylenol switcher. We're out of time. We got to go. Suncast, thank you so much, Chris. Man, I appreciate your expertise on this great topic of FM transmitter sites, STLs, and studios. I hope we could talk about this for 3 hours and still not get everything across about building more simplified studios with today's technology, and you need less stuff to do a great job. You really do. Chris, I appreciate you. Maybe we'll get to see you next week. Is that a possibility?
Looking that way. Yep.
Looking that way. We've got our guest next week is Mitch Glider. He's with CBS Radio. He's going to talk about radio network engineering.
Awesome.
That should be cool. All right, Suncast, thanks for your help. I appreciate you, and we got to go. We'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech.